Right, so for those of you who haven't heard of me, may have done, I am fairly well known. Reasons you should listen to me: I've got a PhD in deception and criminal fraud around identity and academic credentials. I wrote a book which was a bestseller, briefly, called When You're Not You. Sadly, I couldn't get any copies from the publisher to bring here. I've got 57 journal articles on fake credentials, and I'm part of an AI AG expert panel on academic integrity. So I just want to kick off with a few questions for everyone. First of all, who's heard of academic fraud? Yeah, so people creating credentials using false credentials. Who's worked with think tanks? Many think tanks are genuine. Many think tanks are actually just publicity vehicles which will do the same sort of thing, lend their credibility to people. You get the idea. Who here has read my book? A couple of you at least. It's disappointing. Who's read any of my other work? Yeah. Who's heard of me before? And who checked my background before coming along to this talk? So, my actual name is James Bohr, rather than Dr. Rick Jennings. Hopefully, I know some of you recognise me, hopefully it's a surprise to most of you, because I did actually shave for this talk. It was a genuine sacrifice, and it's going to take days to fix. And no, I am not a doctor. I want to make that extremely clear now. I do not have a doctorate. The reason I want to make that clear is we have this lovely law in the UK about fraud by false representation. And the bit I really want to emphasise is that for this talk, I am getting no personal gain, and I am not going to accuse anyone of any particular actions which are covered in this talk, because that would be attempting to cause someone a loss, which would mean by using a different name and pretending to have a title just for the few minutes at the start of the talk, I would be committing fraud by false representation, and if someone was really pissed off, they could probably make a case of it. So I just want to emphasise no gain, not trying to cause anyone a loss, no intention to deceive. Why am I qualified to talk about this? Well, I'm a decent poker player. I don't have to explain myself to a boss, so no one's going to fire me, which is great. I was willing to shave to try and disguise myself, and also put on a hat and pin my hair up, and even dress in very boring clothes compared to normal. I'm a certified CISCP by the CCS, and I also won the Cybersecurity Shirt of the Year in 2022. In case you're wondering, those last two bits are also completely falsely generated, but the certificate there did get over 100 likes on LinkedIn and a lot of positive comments. So I feel it makes my point. Imposter syndrome. You hear a lot about imposter syndrome. It is a genuine problem. It does affect people. It's when you doubt that your credentials are valid, that any evidence, any experience you have actually makes you belong in a particular group. You feel like you don't belong, like all of your peers are better. You reject compliments and awards. Now, plenty of awards should be rejected, all of the pay-to-play ones, definitely. But people will reject other awards. They'll say, oh, I don't deserve this. No, you do. There's an aspect of it which doesn't get talked about so much, which is that it can lead to people having this constant need to gain the next credential, gain the next certificate, pursue the next thing, because that will mean they're not an imposter. A fear of being exposed as fraud, that's extremely common. And a need to constantly justify to yourself. So these are all aspects of imposter syndrome. There are many more. Slight problem. There's also not imposter syndrome. Now, some of the people who suffer from not imposter syndrome will say they suffer from imposter syndrome to fit in. I, by the way, do not actually suffer from imposter syndrome. I'm very lucky that way, except when I'm pretending to be someone else. So, the symptoms of not imposter syndrome: doctorates and professorships from degree mills. So you will see people who say, oh, I'm a professor of this university. You look into the university and it doesn't exist, or it's registered in Panama, or it's part of a network of distance learning universities which do 2-day seminars to give people their honorary doctorates, or various other things. A lot of the time people claim a professorship rather than a doctorate because professor is a job title and is not protected, whereas claiming you've got a doctorate, that's a credential, and that would be fraud or false representation, so it's actually illegal. But there's plenty of fake doctorates out there as well. Fellowships and memberships of bodies that barely exist. LinkedIn is the best place to see this one. You will see people being fellows of various societies. Now, you can be fellows of societies, that's fine, that's great. When the society has 2 members, not so much. The other classic is the CEO of a Discord server. Pay-to-play or entirely faked awards, like sadly my best shirt in cyber award. But again, you can generate these things and you can pay for them, or if you want to save yourself paying for them, hire a photo studio, spend 10 minutes on Canva to get the certificate, get an actor to hand it to you. Brilliant, done. People do this. False certifications like the CISCP, no trademark infringement there, from the CCS, who don't exist, in case you're wondering, just in case you've not picked that up from the talk so far. Fake certifications, also common, even when people are claiming real credentials instead. So people will claim they've got CISP, you can validate that, you can check it, and no, it's nowhere. A lot of the time people don't bother. Opaque think tanks. Now this one is a pet peeve of mine. There are think tanks out there which are completely fake, just generated in order to give people credibility. There are think tanks out there which are funded by very specific bodies to drive agendas. There is a lovely one in the States who are very much against any sort of minimum wage. They were founded by a PR firm on behalf of employers like McDonald's. That is public record, so I can make that claim. And linked influencers with all of that lovely, lovely content which means nothing, and 2,000 sources you should check to learn cyber and belong in cyber. And of course, marketing. Marketing misinformation and fraud. Everything is down to this particular technical issue, which I will not name because some of you may associate that with someone, and as I said, I'm not accusing individuals. But everything's down to this issue. Use my tool to scan for it and fix it. And if you don't fix it, then you're a bad person and I will write a letter and publish it on LinkedIn. So, again, about integrity and verification. For an industry about information security, we are really, really bad at this stuff. We are awful at information integrity and verification. Does anyone here know the author of that quote? Yeah, the rest of you need to go and watch Netflix. Or buy the books, they're brilliant. Red flags. How do you tell if someone is faking things? Well, the problem is some people are just competent and credentialed and not insecure. I'm told, anyone. Extreme claims of competence. Anyone saying they are excellent at everything, that they've got a whole alphabet soup of credentials, immediately be suspect. No one's that good. I don't care, but Albert Einstein was a specialist, he wasn't an expert at everything, and he certainly wasn't competent at a lot of things outside of his field. That will apply to other people. Anyone who's always suggesting they're competent, always suggesting they're an expert. If you are a fan of fan fiction, Mary Sue is the example, utter competence, but with a few little endearing flaws in order to make them seem human. I'm right, everyone else is wrong. Now, for some of us, that's absolutely true. But most of the time, it's a red flag and a warning sign. So if you're seeing someone saying, no, I'm right, all of these other people are wrong, it's a problem. Alphabet soup. You've seen the long, long lists of credentials on LinkedIn. Anyone here's seen Red Dwarf, and I realise I may be too old for the crowd. Bronze swimming certificate, silver swimming certificate. And excessive senior advisory roles. Now, there are people who sit on multiple boards of genuine companies. There are people who sit on multiple boards of companies that don't really exist, like that CEO of a Discord server. And there are people who don't actually have those positions, but they put them up because they're quite hard to verify. You can go to a university and say, did this person study there? And they will then say, we can't tell you because you need to go and ask for their consent. So you go and ask them for their consent and they say, oh no, because I don't have to prove myself to you, warning sign. Or they say, oh yes, absolutely, and then they never do anything about it, also a warning sign. Or they say, yeah, I'll just write an email and copy you in and they can confirm. That's a good sign. But writing to a company and saying, does this person sit on your board of unofficial advisors, official advisors, they're not going to tell you, and for good reason. Bullying behaviours are another one. Many of the people who are doing this sort of academic fraud, potential fraud, impersonation, they will actively bully anyone who calls them out on it. And unfortunately, a lot of the time, they have large followings because they've managed to impress people. And the people they've impressed are easily led. And so they will play the victim and say, look, this person, these people are attacking me. Go and hassle them. And that can turn into really nasty harassment. Organisations that barely exist. Companies House is an excellent resource. If someone claims that they are part of an organisation in the UK, you can look it up on Companies House. If it doesn't exist, it doesn't exist. If it exists and it's dormant, then it's not operating, and then using that name is actually a problem that HMRC would be interested in. And if it exists and they've got a whole total of £1 share capital, it's not a real company. And jargon and technobabble. All of that lovely Star Trek stuff, if people are throwing out technical terms, particularly if they're technical terms that don't seem to make sense or relate to the issue, another lovely red flag. So, what to do about it? Well, be aware, and this is important, be aware calling it out can make you a target. Decide whether it's worthwhile. A lot of the people who do call it out work for large companies with large legal departments and have the support of those companies to do it. If you aren't in that position, then there may be things that you should think about first. And I hate to say it, because it sounds cynical and it sounds horrendous, but it's not worth it unless you know you've got the support and the backing to do it, or you're comfortable with the risk. For academic credentials, if someone claims to be a prominent academic, search for journal articles, search for papers, Google Scholar. If they've not got many authorships or any, then there's questions to be asked about whether they're really a practicing academic. Now, I know there's issues in academia about publish and be damned and overly much weight on research, but if you are claiming to be a professor or a doctor in a particular subject, you will have at least 2 or 3 articles somewhere. You will have works published. Verify any organisations exist beyond the WordPress site. The WordPress site or similar is always a popular one for making sure that there's a website up there and therefore you look authentic. So just do some technical diving in. And that is what we do. And very important, speak with people you trust, and I do mean personally trust, for support and reality checks. It can happen. We can be wrong when we're going to accuse someone of something like this. So make sure you get that reality check. Ask, am I doing the right thing? Am I being plausible? Am I getting overly concerned because they did this and that upset me or that bothered me and therefore I'm now doubtful about everything? And yeah, you could be wrong. Verify before accusing anyone. Verify before calling anyone out. And keep receipts. Keep the evidence of the profile that they had, that long list of credentials. Because sometimes when people get called out, they will just wipe it off and say, well, I never did what they're accusing me of. Look, they're trying to bully me, they're trying to attack me, they're trying to discredit me. My 50,000 followers, go get them. So, with all of that lovely depressing talk, what else would anyone like to know? Are you aware of a US equivalent of That would be varying by state. So there are different ones for different states. Some of them are public, some of them aren't, but there's usually some way that you can check. If a company exists, there will be some established public record of it. It just may be difficult to access.
So one of the things I found when doing research is that there's some patterns where you see companies that are standing up. They're operating underneath the requirement threshold of time to file accounts, and then they close and Phoenix themselves into another org with a very similar name. Can you think of some like the reasons why they're doing that are more legitimate? Because I struggle with why someone would do it.
There's various reasons. So one is that you can found a company for free, effectively. I mean, Companies House have a charge, but if you register through Tide or Counting Up or one of the business banks, they will give you a bank account and all of the company formation documents as a free offer to open your account, which is lovely of them. So there's zero cost, and then you have a company number, a record in Companies House that people often don't bother checking, bank account, a credit history. But if you close it down before you have to file accounts, then you're not going to be taxed on anything that brought in. You're not going to have anyone coming after you for debts. Particularly recently, over the last few years, all of those lovely furlough checks that they were defrauded out of and bounce back loans. I mean, I think it was something like £6 billion of fraud that they chose to write off. So that's the type of reason. It's a disposable vehicle to do something and then disappear, and Companies House do not check identities.
Yeah, cool.
So you can do it under a fake name.
I couldn't think of, when I see people do it, and I track quite a lot of stuff, right? I couldn't think of a reason as to why you'd want to do that if your goals were probably ethical, is probably the right way to use it.
So I will be fair to some of them. There are companies that start up and people have second thoughts where it goes wrong and they fold. But generally they won't then start up a very similarly named company. Yeah. I mean, you'll be aware that there's a long list of Chinese-named companies which appear to be generated by algorithm.
Any reason why you trust the red flags mentioned? What's the underlying behaviours?
So there's various things I can think of. One is a sort of extreme version of imposter syndrome, where they've just decided to go all in and embrace it. One is insecurity. Major one that I see is personal profile, vanity, and profit. So it's trying to say, yes, I'm an expert, yes, I'm the best in the world at this thing. Kind of like me, Dr. Rick Jennings, who's the best in the world at this sort of fraud. So it's trying to get that reassurance, and it's marketing. It's making money. People make claims about products. I'm sure everyone here can think of one or two companies with outlandish claims, some of which are very large and might be going through court cases, and some of which are very small and just an individual and some friends trying to sell something that isn't that special, but they can convince people it is by shouting and writing letters and so on.
Assuming more Bitcoin inside, why do they trust?
Why do they trust? Right. So why do victims trust? Well, as I said, we are very bad in this industry at verifying and checking the integrity of information. I can almost guarantee if you're on LinkedIn and have a reasonable sized network, there are a few people in there who aren't what they say they are. Don't have the expertise they act like they have. Particularly if they're very loud about it. So the reason we trust is because, honestly, we're all human. We may or may not have imposter syndrome, but we are insecure. We like social proof. We like evidence. And once you've got a few people caught in something like that, when you've got that whole people calling out, we don't like to be fooled. So being called out will tend to make us commit more. And this has been evidenced many times over the years by cults. So there's been cults who predicted the world would end when a comet went overhead. And there was a lovely piece of research done by a reporter on it. After the comet went overhead and the world did not end, they became more convinced because they'd sold houses, they'd cut ties with family, and committed to this. It had a cost, so surely they were right, and it was just their faith that had spared them. And it's a very similar thing. That cult of personality can be incredibly convincing. And it's why it's so effective, because you will get fanatical people essentially coming after you if you point out flaws in it.
I have a few questions that are different from each other. So my first question is, in the UK, is it only the government that can verify a degree without you giving consent? Because I know that for sure, because for my citizenship application, nobody asked me for consent. They probably checked it without it.
So it will depend on the university and what their policy is. Law enforcement, government, some companies may have agreements and say, we've got someone applying, but it will be down to the individual university's policy. Usually it's, if you are an individual asking to validate someone's credentials, they will always say, yeah, we want their consent. If you're a company and you're well established or have an existing relationship with the university, they know that you're doing it for a valid reason. They know that it's not going to be such an issue.
Is there a central register? Because some countries do, like, you put the degree number and then you get like a verification on the website of the Ministry of Education, for example.
And there are attempts to build one, and some universities have signed up to one or the other, but there is no single central register that I'm aware of. There may be, I'm not aware of, but I've never found it.
The second question is about people. As you mentioned, like sometimes when there is an imposter, there are people who are trying to pull him out, and then the imposter tries to suppress the person. But what's the explanation of the opposite when someone is legitimate, and then you have people who are trying to destroy his reputation by calling him out on being an imposter, and they probably know that, but they have some other reason to put people down?
So there's plenty of reasons to discredit, but if it's someone who's actually an imposter trying to discredit someone, does anyone know the game King of the Hill? Yeah, try to be the one standing on the castle at the end. There are few better ways to establish credibility and authority in people's minds than taking someone down. We are naturally competitive, vicious creatures. I mean, we're also lovely creatures and we do social bonding and all sorts of things really well, but we do have flaws. So someone taking someone down or discrediting someone, that buys them credibility, because it means you don't trust them, so you must trust me. Anyone else?
Thank you.
Occasionally you'll see people getting included on social media lists without their consent. Let's say, for example, I once got included on a list of 100 CISOs on Twitter who must follow. I've never been a CISO in my life. Is this related to this kind of profile?
It can be. I mean, that's more related to journalism. So, for a mixture of reasons, if I'm a journalist, firstly, it's great content to write. It's really easy. And long lists are something that people just click through, and you get your advertising revenue and you get your reads. The other thing it does is, let's say I'm trying to convince someone that I am a great CISO. So I do a list of the top 100 and put myself somewhere around number 7. And then all of the others, I actually find people I think do carry credibility. And because I'm in that group now, I've stolen what they've done and tied it to myself. The other thing is sometimes journalists just have deadlines and they're desperate and they grab names and don't really verify them. Like I said, we're really bad at integrity and verification. But yes, because I agree, I was put on a list of, I think, top 10 LinkedIn influencers in cybersecurity, and I've never been an influencer in my life. Don't laugh, I hate that word, I hate that concept. Anyone else?
Do you know why companies don't verify? Because I changed my name yesterday, and literally I just had to sign into the online portal and change it, and everywhere else I changed my name, I've had to send off proof that I live at the address with the new name on it, which is really difficult to get because first base actually needs proof. So with the people to change a thing too. And then the company's house is just like, confirm that this is correct, and then it's like a warning saying that it's fraud to say otherwise. But people just get from that. Like, why don't you?
Because the laws and procedures governing Companies House are massively antiquated and have not really kept up. And there's no real incentive for them to do so because they're not affected by the fraud. And it brings a lot of money to the UK. A huge amount of money. The other thing is you can appoint someone as a director of a company without them even knowing because you don't require their signature.
That's what I was thinking. I could add other people to it and change their name as well.
So,
without them agreeing to it.
yeah, with those Chinese companies, many of them are actually assigned to directors who aren't even aware they exist. Some of the directors don't exist, but some of them just live in the UK and their details have been dropped in.
So the details are already on Companies House.
And of course, if you're a director of a company, you are liable personally for the actions of that company. Just to reassure you.
Also, there's nobody policing.
No. I think the funding that goes into fraud investigations is something like 1% of law enforcement budget, while fraud itself is about 40% of crime.
So you can find loads of it really quickly.
It doesn't take much effort.
Okay.
Right. If that's it for questions then, I'm going to leave you with one last thing. Remember, snake oil is bad. Don't drink it. Don't buy it. Yeah? Just avoid it like the plague. Con men have been around for a long, long time. Con women as well. And honestly, it doesn't change much. All of this stuff is old. None of it's new. It's just empowered a bit by some of the tech we've got. Thank you.